The night they declared my father dead, Ingrid wore heels to court. Black ones with that glossy toe, like the funeral was just another step toward what she really wanted. My name's Colin Campbell. I'm 21. I live in New York, but not the part with doormen and galleries. The part where your shoes live by the heater and your rent's paid in 3 hustles. I've been telling this story the same way for years, plain and straight, because that's how it happened. Mom died when I was 10. Her name was Jenna. She used to draw cartoons in the margins of bills just to make me laugh. The night Percy was born, I was sitting outside the delivery room, swinging my feet off the bench, and I heard the anesthetist whisper "code" before someone stepped out and quietly shut the door on me. I didn't ask questions. I just sat there till a nurse knelt down, didn't meet my eyes, and said, "Your brother's stable. You're a big brother now." Quick note, before listening, share in the comments which city or country you're watching from. Thanks, and let's continue. Percy came out quiet, never really broke that habit. They said autism, nonverbal, sensory issues, all of it. But he was exact. His world was more measured than ours. He didn't talk, but he noticed when the clock was 2 minutes off or when his socks didn't match. And I learned him, piece by piece, like a map you had to walk instead of read. Dad, Jeremy. He was a photojournalist, a travel shooter who'd survived riots, floods, deserts. Guy made his name crawling on roofs in war zones with a camera and a prayer. After Mom, he gave that up cold, switched to running the travel imprint from home, made pancakes every Sunday with too much cinnamon, and let Percy lick the spoon. We weren't fancy, but we were solid. Until Ingrid. She showed up at the publishing house with a file folder, big white teeth, and too much perfume. Acted like she was being helpful, but moved around like she was casing the place. Hugged Dad like he was a prize, and side-eyed Percy like he was a spreadsheet error. She brought grief casseroles and calendar invites to charity brunches, talked about healing through service, and started hinting that a little more income could help us all move forward. Dad, being a peacekeeper, decided one last assignment a year wouldn't kill him. Just one expedition, just a few weeks. To keep Ingrid happy. Yeah, that's the one that killed him. The river caught him on the way back, somewhere past the city mouth where the channel widens and the current turns vicious. Coast Guard found the wreckage and some of his gear, but not the body. That week, harbor horns screamed every morning. I still hear them. 6 months later, a court called it. Presumed dead under the statute. Ingrid brought her own lawyer, wore black, nodded along solemn, then filed for full guardianship of Percy. She shut off my tuition payments, cut Percy's speech therapy, locked down the accounts. Then held up a glossy brochure with fake trees and smiling kids and said, "He leaves Monday." I was 21, working the espresso machine mornings, delivery bike nights. I flipped laundry while checking Percy's checklists. I kept the house running like a stubborn mule. That night I didn't cry. I pulled our papers from the fire safe, stuck my ID and Percy's into a file folder, and tucked it under my hoodie. When Percy asked if the bus would be loud, I told him we'd sit up front and count the stops. I told him to pack light and wear the blue hoodie, the one that didn't itch. I didn't tell him we weren't coming back. The morning we left, the hall light was still burnt out and Percy kept his chin tucked in like the air itself was suspicious. I shoved the envelope from Marla down into my sock, 50s and 20s, rolled tight, wrapped in a hair tie that smelled like cheap hairspray and club smoke. She'd pressed it into my palm without a word, just nodded once and walked off like it wasn't everything she had. Len swung up on his bike 10 minutes later, bundled in 2 hoodies and duct-taped gloves. He looked me over once and nodded at the bags. "Both?" he asked. I said, "Strap 'em." He bungeed our duffels to a crate on the back of the bike like it was just another run, just another day, and pedaled alongside us all the way to the corner bus stop before peeling off without a word. We were ghosts before sunrise. 2 buses, 1 transfer, and a river train that crawled north like it knew we needed time. Percy sat against the window with 1 finger on the metal seal, breathing in sets of 4, like his old therapist taught him. He didn't ask where we were going. He knew it wasn't back. Grandma's house sat on the edge of a town the interstate forgot, tucked between a closed lumber mill and an old apple orchard that leaned east like it was listening. The porch steps creaked even when you didn't move. The attic smelled like mouse nests and dust, but it was dry, and the view faced the woods. I told Percy, "This is it." He didn't speak, just touched the floorboards with his palm, and then nodded once. The house wasn't big, but it was ours. Grandma left it to Dad before Ingrid showed up, and the county had it down as his separate property. What saved us was the little piece of legal prep she filed before she died, a transfer on death deed that named me as contingent beneficiary with full right of occupancy. Ingrid couldn't get within 10 feet of the front step without tripping on that filing. We climbed the narrow attic ladder, dropped our bags, and I pulled the board up from the corner, taped our birth certificates and Dad's old papers under it, flat and secure. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. I made new rules on the first night. Earplugs hang by the door, shoes in the bin with blue tape, dinner at 7 sharp, lights off by 9. Routine wasn't optional. It was air. Next morning, I walked into Sophie White's cafe with my delivery bag still on my back. She didn't flinch, looked me over once, then said, "Can you steam milk without choking?" I said, "I'll figure it out." She tossed me an apron, no questions asked. 3 days later, she added me to the delivery board. 5 days after that, she built a color-coded schedule with me on her laptop and called it a plan. Not charity, a plan. The attic got cold at night, but Percy didn't mind. He stacked his notebooks like bricks near the vent and counted the creaks when the wind picked up. He started school the next week. Mrs. Ives, the history teacher, took one look at him and said, "My son doesn't like bells either," and handed me a list. What forms to file, which ones to ignore, where to push back if anyone tried to shuffle Percy into the wrong box. He met Asa Trent at lunch. Kid wore a cargo vest full of postcards and said, "Trade you an old lighthouse for that orange." Percy peeled his orange in one piece, gave it up, and got 2 postcards in return. They sat in silence for 15 minutes, then walked to class without speaking. Perfect match. I worked the counter mornings and delivered scones and coffee across town by bike in the afternoons. Sophie helped me figure out a rhythm. No pity in her eyes, just quiet logistics and backup plans. She didn't ask why Percy flinched at sirens or why I stared too long at old men in gray jackets. She saw it all and said nothing. Nights, I lay on the attic floor with a hoodie for a pillow, watching the moon cut lines through the slats. I listened for sirens, for engines, for footsteps that never came. Still, every document stayed right under that loose board. On the 10th day, Ingrid texted, "Come home." I didn't respond. 2 days later, custody hearing scheduled. I logged the date and time, screenshotted it, and sent it to a new email I made just for court prep. After that, silence. 11 days of it. I printed those texts and filed them in the same envelope with our documents. Because silence from Ingrid didn't mean safety, it meant a different angle was coming. Len found me a loaner bike with working brakes and half a bell. I rode it like it was worth something. Ran scones before sunrise and closed shop at dusk. I learned which customers tipped, which ones lied about forgetting their wallet, and how to smell a supply shortage a week before it hit the register. Sophie noticed when I stopped drinking the burnt drip we gave to customers we didn't like. She handed me a mug one night and said, "You're not just surviving, you know that, right?" I didn't answer. Just kept washing cups in order, biggest to smallest. Somewhere between the second batch of muffins and the third post office run, I realized something strange. I didn't miss the city. Not the noise, not the pacing, not even the skyline. But I missed Dad. I missed the way he cracked gum at red lights like he was shooting B-roll. The way he could find the best light in the worst diner. The way he used to stand beside me at the kitchen sink and say, "You rinse, I stack." I could still hear him say it, voice low and steady like a promise. Every morning, I stood behind the espresso bar and frothed milk like it was a ritual. One hand on the pitcher, one eye on the clock, steam hissing steady. I'd recite the week's budget under my breath. Rent, groceries, Percy's appointments, Sophie's shift payment, plus $5 for socks. If the foam split wrong or the numbers didn't line up, my hands shook. At night, I wiped the espresso head twice and locked up at exactly 10:12. Then I'd sweep. Then I'd double-check the register. Routine kept me from unraveling. Routine kept Percy stable. Routine was the only thing in the house we could afford that actually worked. Percy had started a notebook system around then. One for facts, one for scenes, which I figured meant stories. He didn't say much about what was in them, but every couple nights he'd read one to me while I sorted laundry. Just short, clipped lines, brothers on a ferry, a silent lunchroom, endings left open like a door propped with a stone. He said once, "I want to earn so I can subtract from you." I looked at him. "You mean so I have less weight to carry?" He nodded. That was Percy's version of a hug. By week 3, Sophie bumped me to shift lead. She didn't say it like a promotion, just handed me the new schedule and said, "Grinder's fixed, coffee's hot, and you haven't been late once. That's how people move up here." She slid the direct deposit form across the counter like it was a napkin. Mrs. Ives met me outside the school after drop-off one Thursday, with a folder already labeled, "Colin Campbell, Guardian." She said, "We built an IEP that actually fits. You just need to sign here, here, and here." And I already gave Asa the green light to stay by his side when the class gets loud. Percy stopped bringing home oranges after that. He and Asa started trading drawings instead. Lighthouses, ships, empty benches. Percy colored in silence. Asa watched, counted time on his fingers, then handed over gum when it looked like Percy was getting tight. Marla texted me a link out of nowhere. northharborpages.net. A zine site. She'd posted scans of Percy's notebook stories. No address listed, just a P.O. box she'd rented on the edge of town. "People are buying them," she said the next day, breathless. "Like, actual orders. I printed 10 more this morning. I used the school's risograph. Don't rat." I didn't. The first official knock came 2 Mondays later. Percy was eating crackers in the attic, lining them up by edge chipping. I opened the door to a guy in a pressed jacket, eyes like a meter reader. "Colin Campbell?" he asked, already unfolding the manila envelope. I nodded. "Service of process," he said. "Custody petition. Emergency review." He paused. "Sorry, kid. Name's Calder Mott on the letterhead. You should probably read the fine print." The guy left without waiting for a signature. I didn't panic. I walked back to the counter, took a picture of the top page, and texted Sophie. She read it in the kitchen, then came out and leaned against the doorway like she'd been waiting for this exact thing. "If they want character statements," she said, "I'll testify to Percy's routine, your work hours, and your stress management. I've got all the shift logs. I'm not scared of paperwork." I let out half a breath. That was enough. 2 days after that, Bram Sutter, Ingrid's real estate buddy, posted an online listing for our old city house. "Coming soon," it said, like it already belonged to him. I took screenshots. The floor plan had our bedroom marked conversion potential. He hadn't even waited for probate. I forwarded it to Mr. Henderson. Hadn't talked to him since the memorial, but his number was still saved. He replied inside the hour. "Looking into it," he wrote. His voice, even in text, felt like rebar. Solid. That Thursday, Sophie's landlord delivered a notice. Lease termination pending property reassessment. No explanation. I traced the LLC through 2 search portals and found a shell tied to one of Bram's holding companies. I brought it to her in the kitchen. "They're trying to squeeze you to squeeze me," I said. She nodded once, lips pressed. "Then we double down," she said. Len took a stack of Percy's zines and stashed them in his courier bag. He pedaled the waterfront circuit and dropped them in cafes, record stores, the marina kiosk. People don't stop a bike that looks like it's in a hurry, he said, especially if you ring the bell like a lunatic. Percy didn't say much that week, just kept writing. 3 new stories. No titles, just numbers. I found one with a line underlined in red pen. A brother is a small lighthouse you carry in your coat. I read it 3 times. I folded it and put it in my wallet behind my ID. The next night I cleaned the espresso machine twice just to burn nervous energy. We'd gone from hiding to hustling to now standing dead center in somebody's crosshairs. Marla came by the shop around close with a printout of order totals. "People love this kid's writing," she said. "We're going to need more paper." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure it's not just pity buys?" She snorted. "Nah, man. They quote him. Like, in comments. Some lady wrote a whole blog post called, 'My Brother the Lighthouse.'" Sophie stepped out from the back with a fresh pot of drip and 2 mugs. "If they're quoting him, it's not pity. It's resonance." Percy sat in the attic that night, sketching a scene of 2 boys sitting on a dock. I watched him through the open hatch, backlit by his clip lamp. He didn't flinch when the wind knocked a loose shutter, just kept drawing. I locked the downstairs door, slid the bolt, then walked back to the counter and rewrote the next week's budget on the back of a coffee sleeve. Rent, groceries, zine paper. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building a life around words. Sophie taped the open mic flyer to the cafe window the same day Percy printed his 5th zine. She didn't make it a big deal. Just a soft launch with muffins and house drip. No cover charge. The list filled in half an hour. I signed up last, just to balance the page. Percy put his name down as P.K. North. No first name, no intro. Just initials and a pen name he made up after looking at a train schedule. The place filled by 7. Locals, a couple art kids from the high school, a guy in corduroy who claimed to run a podcast but didn't say the name. Percy sat near the back with his notebook clutched flat and his hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands. Dorian Pike, that loudmouth DJ from town with too many thrift store vests, brought an old speaker that still had a church sticker on the side. I told him no loops, no mic feedback, nothing stupid. He held up his hands. "Relax, man. I've got harbor sounds, waves and wind, calm stuff. It's texture, not noise." I gave him a look. He shrugged. "Trust me, it works." It did. When Percy's turn came, Sophie called him up like it was just any other reader. He walked to the mic without looking up. Hands flat, voice quiet, every word exact. "Story number 7, he said. 2 brothers on a dock. One counts time, one counts foghorns." You could hear a coffee stirrer hit tile. Nobody moved. Even Dorian stopped chewing his gum. Percy read 2 pages. Literal short lines. No drama. But you could feel it in your ribs. He ended with, "A dock is a question. A brother is the answer." Nobody clapped for a beat. Then Sophie started, small and steady. The sound built from there. Marla caught the whole thing on her phone, posted the clip to the cafe feed that night. I figured we'd get a couple likes, maybe a share or 2 from the kids in town. Instead, it spread fast. First it was our town, then the next one over. Then some bookstagrammer with a tiny book account reposted it and called it pure. Percy didn't care about the comments. He asked if people had questions about the spacing in his zine. I told him not yet. Next morning, Len taped up a wire rack near the register and labeled it with his beat-up label maker. North Harbor Pages. People bought one with their coffee, then tipped like crazy. Sophie raised an eyebrow, handed me the jar, and said, "Inventory with feelings. Who knew?" I told Percy to keep it anonymous. We didn't need Ingrid sniffing around, not yet. He nodded. We used initials on the covers and printed with the P.O. box. Then the local weekly ran a feature. Not front page, but centerfold. Who is P.K. North? They printed a blurry shot of Percy's hands from the open mic and quoted the dedication from his second zine. "To C.C., Keeper of the Light." I froze when I saw it. We didn't talk about dedications. I stared at that line longer than I meant to. We sold out the first run of zines in 2 weekends. 84 copies gone, 10 more by mail. Sophie had to restock toner twice. Bram called me 2 days later. "Kid," he said, like I was a lost intern. "That house you're squatting in. Unproductive capital. Let's be smart here." I kept my tone flat. "Say that again in writing, please." He chuckled. "Let's not get litigious." "Too late," I said. Calder Mott, Ingrid's go-to legal vulture, filed a new motion with the court. Unstable sibling obstructing access to necessary services. Total trash, but enough to trigger a review. Mrs. Ives didn't flinch. She wrote the judge a letter, typed, signed, witnessed, outlining Percy's progress. How he engaged, communicated, worked with structure. She cited the zine project without naming Percy outright. At the next park reading, Percy stood under the covered gazebo with Asa beside him. Asa didn't say anything, just turned the pages for him while Percy read story 9. A lighthouse with no bulb, but it still points the way. A kid clapped first, then a woman with a stroller, then the rest. By the end, Percy was holding the last page in both hands, still as a statue, and nobody was looking at their phones. That's when I knew we had something real. Back at the cafe, I counted the lockbox twice, then once more for good measure. I walked it across town to a lawyer whose office sat above a quilt shop and smelled like paper and lemon drops. He wore corduroy, didn't shake hands, and only said one thing before quoting his rate. "You're not too late, but you're close. We need paper, not passion." I paid the retainer in cash, told him I wanted to get ahead of what was coming. "You got records?" he asked. "Everything but their toothbrushes," I said. He smiled. "That's a start." Back at the cafe, after close, Sophie handed me a spare set of keys. "If they push me out," she said, "you run the mornings. We don't shut down. Not for them." I nodded once, lined up the cups by size, and said, "Copy that." 8 weeks out, the city book fair hit the calendar. We circled it in red, not as a maybe, as a line we planned to cross. I'm telling this part the way Mr. Henderson reconstructed it later, piece by piece, because that's the only way it makes sense. It explains why some things get forgiven and others don't. It explains why the river stopped being just water and turned into evidence. Dad's catamaran hit bad water where the river widens and starts pretending it's an ocean. Wind pushed against current, and the hull slapped wrong. He went over hard, clipped his head on the crossbeam, and lost the camera before he lost the boat. The current carried him past the reeds where sound drops off and depth lies. That's the part everyone agreed on. A fishing crew called in a report later that morning. A man washed into the shallows 2 bends down, middle-aged, bleeding, alive, but not saying much. The details shifted with the tide. One guy said the man had dark hair, another said gray. Someone swore he was wearing a jacket that didn't fit the season. No name, no papers, no camera. Rumors stacked fast at the river mouth. Short pieces of a story about a picture man without a camera. A guy who asked where he was and didn't recognize the answer. A guy who walked like he'd spent his life balancing weight through his hips, careful and practiced. Mr. Henderson didn't buy the tidy version. He burned air miles and shoe leather instead. He looked where the boat was found, not where the story said it went. He stood on docks and talked to men who didn't look at the sky when they lied. Dock workers pointed him to bars, and bars pointed him to crews, and crews pointed him to a man who walked like that photographer. Henderson said later he followed posture more than faces. Before he went upriver, he stopped at the city house. Ingrid answered the door in black, hair pinned tight, face set like she'd practiced. Bram Sutter sat on the couch too close, legs crossed like he owned the room. Henderson kept his questions short and his eyes moving. New locks on the door, new keypad on the alarm. A number taped by the phone that wasn't ours. Ingrid cried on cue. Bram did nothing at all, which told Henderson more than tears ever could. The red wine stain on the rug was old, not from mourning. The place smelled like someone else's perfume, something sharp and expensive that didn't belong to grief. Henderson left without raising his voice. That was his way. He went to the police first, then to the local paper that used to run Dad's travel spreads, then to the courier company that handled freight near the river, then, quietly, to my friends. Some neighbors told him I'd gone wild and ran off. Ingrid kept it cleaner. She said, "He's grieving and confused, and we're protecting Percy's routine." She'd already changed our numbers. Calder Mott had already hinted that contacting us violated some protective arrangement that didn't exist on paper, but slowed people down anyway. Confusion works best when it sounds official. Henderson kept notes, dates, names, withdrawals. He traced Bram's shell companies through property records and found a stack of cash pulls that lined up neat with Ingrid's club nights and charity tables. Money that moved fast and didn't come back. He flagged them all. Upriver, a deckhand finally said something that stuck. He said there'd been a man sleeping in a shed by the marsh for weeks. Didn't drink, didn't ask for much. Asked about tides, asked about cameras like he used to own one. Henderson went there.
The shed was empty, but the footprints were careful, like someone who didn't waste steps. What I knew back then was smaller. I knew that some mornings, when I biked past the river on deliveries, the sky looked less dangerous, like a bruise turning yellow. The water didn't grab at the light the same way. I felt it in my chest before I had words for it. I didn't know Henderson had already packed a small bag and told himself, "We look again tomorrow." He looked again and again. He checked clinics and shelters and docks. He listened to people who spoke in fragments. He learned about a man who'd been pulled from the shallows by a fishing crew foreman named Noam Ridley. A quiet guy who didn't like attention and didn't file stories unless he had to. Noam had kept the man warm, fed him soup, asked questions slow. The man couldn't answer most of them. He didn't know his name. He didn't know the date. He knew how to clean a lens with his shirt and how to hold a camera steady in bad light. Henderson found Noam by accident, the way you do when you don't quit. He listened without interrupting. When Noam described the way the man stood, Henderson didn't need more. In the city, Ingrid tightened her circle. Eunice Vale hosted dinners and posted photos about supporting families. Bram listed properties that weren't his yet. Calder sent letters that sounded like law but weren't. Henderson collected all of it and kept moving. Then one afternoon, weeks later, a river group shared a flyer with Sophie's cafe name on it. Something about a reading, about harbor stories. Henderson circled the word harbor in his notes and underlined it twice. He said later that was the first time the trail pointed forward instead of back. All of this was happening while I counted tips and stacked cups and taught Percy how to ship zines without bending corners. While Ingrid smiled for cameras and called herself a widow. While Bram measured rooms that weren't his. While Calder sharpened phrases meant to cut people smaller. I didn't know any of it then. I just knew the river didn't scare me as much some days. I just knew the air felt different, like it was holding something back. The night Henderson finally stood on the dock where Noam said he'd found the man, the water was calm. He told himself, out loud this time, "We look again tomorrow," and bent down to study a set of footprints that walked careful toward the reeds. He followed them upstream. We boxed the first run of Harbor Brothers on a Tuesday night, right after I fixed the supply shelf that kept collapsing under the bags of espresso. Sophie brought packing tape, Percy lined up the covers to check alignment, and I sealed every box with a marker swipe and a whispered number. 450 copies. Pre-consigned for the indie table at the city book fair. It didn't feel like a little side project anymore. Percy didn't say much. Just made sure his dedication printed right, to the one who stood in the fog first. A few days later, a city culture blog picked up the clip from the preview table at the cafe. They called the chapbook quietly revolutionary, whatever that means, and quoted the line that had already started making the rounds online. "You carry a small lighthouse for your brother in your coat." Then they posted a photo. Sophie in the background, laughing near the pastry case. Me in the foreground, out of focus, head down, bandana tied behind my neck. Nothing sharp, but clear enough. That photo reached Henderson by morning. He called the freelancer
asked for the original shots, and got the full set. He sent me one via text. Just the bandana knot centered. My father's knot. Double looped, left over right, pulled notched like a camera strap. He only taught 2 people to tie it. His message said, "Who taught you to tie this?" I stared at it for a long time, sitting on the milk crate behind the cafe, shift apron still on, my hands smelling like dish soap and lemon peel. Then I typed back, "My father." That's when I knew we weren't circling anymore. Henderson had a real lead. He already had a name, Gnome Ridley, the fisherman who pulled a man from the river. But Ingrid had locked down every route to us. Phone, mail, records. The blog photo was his first clean breadcrumb. We arranged a meeting, neutral ground, the park by the chess tables, noon sharp, no press, no cafe backdrop. Just 3 people who still cared. I brought Percy, told him we were meeting someone Dad worked with. Sophie came too. She didn't hover, just stood 1 step behind me, not in front. That mattered more than I could explain. Henderson didn't hug, just looked straight at Percy first and said, "Your commas are straight." Percy blinked, then nodded once. "I have a style guide," he said. That was enough for Henderson. He smiled at me next, tighter than usual. "You've done work I'd put on a cover." I didn't say anything yet. I was waiting. He said, "We've got a man, pulled from the shallows, memory coming back slow, name's right, voice is close." And I believe him. I didn't answer for maybe 30 seconds. Couldn't. My chest felt like it was filled with static. Percy looked up at me. Is he late or missing? I swallowed hard. We're about to find out. 2 days later, Caldermott filed an emergency hearing motion. This one came with teeth. Said I was exploiting a minor's intellectual property for commercial gain, that I'd concealed a dependent child from legal guardianship. It landed fast and hard. Stack of papers left with Sophie's barista like it was a bakery order. That same hour, Ingrid posted a photo with Eunice Vale. Lawn chairs, wine glasses, pearls. Caption, "Protecting family means not flinching when it's hard." I flinched once, then got to work. Marla pulled the docket details and started combing the case number. Found a fire code complaint filed against the cafe, same day as the hearing notice. It listed emergency exits, unverified, and supplies stored above regulation height. Bull. The LLC that filed it, a shell traced back to one of Bram's dummy listings. Pressure by paperwork, classic play. I pulled Percy from school early and walked him through the courthouse at off hours. We mapped the steps, elevators, door swings. He noted the way the ceiling echoed in certain halls and where the water fountains hummed. We sat on a bench at 317, split a granola bar, and talked about nothing for a full 10 minutes. At home, I ran through the case again, line by line, trying to see the holes they'd twist into knives. Sophie called in a favor, friend of hers, decent city lawyer who didn't use big words to prove his fee, said we'd have a slot. Mrs. Ives worked with Percy, gave him a list of calm answer questions. Where do you write? When do you feel safe? What helps when it's loud? Asa showed up the next morning with index cards, color-coded, laminated. Percy went through them like flashcards, mouthing each line with one finger curled in his sleeve. Sophie gave me a look across the table while the boys worked. She said, "This hearing, it's not about guilt, it's about territory. They don't want custody. They want control." I nodded. And they're mad we stopped asking permission. Len was already riding dirty. Courier satchel full of screenshots, bank withdrawals, digital paper trails. He even pulled a flyer for one of Ingrid's fake events. Gala for autism support. Venue listed. Seat map. Ticket prices. No registration. No tax ID. No clue where the money actually went. We printed 2 copies. One for court, one for the record. That night, I found Sophie restocking the coffee bar. I didn't get on a knee or light candles or even say her name first. I just said, "Stay if it gets loud." She looked up. I don't spook easy. I took her hand and squeezed once. Then I started packing Percy's documents again. Hearing was set. We had a slot, we had evidence, we had names, facts, timelines, and we had one more piece the others didn't know about. Henderson called late that night. His voice was tight but steady. "Your father's ready to testify," he said. "We'll see you in the building." I didn't say anything back, just listened to the sound of his breath and the river behind him, rising slow. We walked into the courthouse at 9:02. The guard didn't even look up. Percy had his pencils in hand, lined up by length, sharpened to match. I wore Dad's old watch, the one with the scuffed face and the band held together by electrical tape. I hadn't touched it since the memorial. We took the left aisle to dodge the courthouse camera. Sophie had warned me about local reporters grabbing B-roll during family court days. Percy kept his hood down, but his eyes scanned the room like a field map. Ingrid sat with her hands folded and her shoulders angled inward, composed and deliberate. Calder Mott, that bloodless snake of a lawyer, adjusted his tie twice and made small talk with the bailiff like he knew this was already in the bag. Eunice Vale was posted up second row, wearing a wide hat with fake feathers, smiling like this was a pageant. The case had been assigned to a judge from another county, neutral, new to all the names and faces. Eunice had no standing in the room, legally or otherwise, but she made sure she was seen, like always. Our attorney, quiet woman with a green legal pad and glasses that didn't slip, stood straight and led with numbers, school progress, verified income, confirmed housing. Sophie handed in color-coded schedules and payroll logs with my name on every shift. Nothing dramatic, just facts, just hours and heat maps of effort. Mrs. Ives was next. She didn't posture. She didn't soften. She told him what Percy could do, how he self-regulated now, how Asa helped anchor him, how routines turned into real skills. "He hasn't hidden under a desk since September," she said. "That's not luck. That's safety." Calder rolled his pen between his fingers. He waited like a man with rehearsed ammunition. When it was his turn, he used words like fishhooks. Unfit. Runaway. Exploitation of a vulnerable minor. He made me sound like a con artist with a sob story. Ingrid dabbed at eyes that weren't wet. Eunice crossed her legs like the ruling was already signed. Then Len stepped up. Hoodie zipped, hat off. He didn't smile. He laid out screenshots, listings Bram posted for our old house, before probate, before court. Side-by-sides of shell companies with matching tax numbers, lease notices tied to addresses Bram never visited. Same LLC, 3 names. You can call it what you want, but it smells like fraud, Len said. Marla followed, wearing black nail polish and a denim jacket covered in campaign buttons. She dropped 2 color prints on the table. Ingrid's gala flyers, identical layouts, same donation QR codes. The recipient? A private Venmo tied to Ingrid's full name. "Charity doesn't hide its receipts," Marla said. "Also, the event never happened. I checked with the venue." Calder shifted. You could almost hear it, like the air changed temperature. Then Percy asked to speak. The judge glanced down, adjusted her glasses. "You prepared for that?" I said. "He is." Percy stood. He didn't look at Ingrid. He didn't look at the gallery, just the judge. "I can write at home," he said. "At the other place I hid under a table, that's all." Then he sat down. No tears, just fact. Calder leaned forward. "Your Honor, clearly the child's been coached." The judge held up a hand. "Stop. You're not helping yourself." She turned to Ingrid's side. "Why isn't this charity registered? Why does this code route to a personal account?" Eunice stopped smiling. We recessed for 10 minutes. I led Percy into the hallway. Sophie handed him a juice box and nodded toward a bench. I leaned against the wall and exhaled for the first time since the door opened. Around the corner, I heard Bram whisper to Ingrid, "We have to steer the story in our favor." A reporter from the local paper overheard it and wrote something down. Sometimes the world helps when you don't expect it. Back in session, our counsel made it clean. The miner's routine is stable. Support systems are verified. Residence is safe. Custody should remain with Mr. Colin Campbell pending full review. Calder stood like he was delivering final judgment. This is obstruction. We demand immediate removal. Today. Then the door opened. I heard Henderson clear his throat, that low gravel sound he always made before calling meetings to order, like punctuation. And behind him, Dad walked in. He looked thinner, hair more silver than gray, wearing a cheap river jacket and a button-down 2 sizes too big. But the way he stood, that didn't change. Balanced weight, shoulder back, chin up, camera posture. Ingrid went sheet white. Bram stared at the carpet like it might swallow him. I didn't cry, didn't move. I stood. Percy stood too. He said, calm as a weather map, "You're late, Dad." That was that. The judge recessed longer this time. Enough for the court clerk to refill her tea. Enough for the pressure in my chest to turn sharp. Dad sat across from me in a corner seat, calm as stone. Same hands, same posture. He didn't fidget. He didn't pace. Instead, he signed an affidavit that Henderson had drafted with surgical care. It detailed the accident, the days he couldn't name, the faces he remembered in pieces, and the moment memory came back like a punch to the throat. Every sentence was clipped and precise, just like his old field notes. Henderson lined up attachments like it was a gallery shoot. Police reports, intake logs, Ridley's signed statement, and annotated maps of the river bend. No fat, all muscle. I turned one page and saw a name I didn't know yet. Gnome Ridley. The fisherman who pulled my father out of the water, gave him soup, gave him shelter, gave him time. I pressed my finger to the name, committed it to memory. Ingrid came back in with a different face. She went for soft, tired, worn thin grief. Said it all happened so fast. Said she was overwhelmed. Said, I never stopped hoping he'd return. Then Calder stepped up and pivoted like a man slipping on ice. He tried to narrow the case to technical complications, jurisdiction confusion, and delayed documentation. The judge didn't blink. She said, "Do you have the timeline written out?" He didn't. She said, "I need dates and deposits, not theories." I almost smiled. Lies don't like spreadsheets. Midway through the final recess, Bram Sutter slipped out a side door like a man dodging a bounced check. By that evening, he'd posted a photo of a martini and captioned it, "Fresh opportunities ahead." By the next morning, a detective from the Financial Crimes Division left a message with our attorney about Shell landlord fraud connected to one of Bram's LLCs. Ingrid's gala still went ahead that night. Eunice Vale posted a filtered reel of past hors d'oeuvres and string lights. Smiles all around. Like nothing happened. But Henderson's contact at the city paper didn't let it slide. The headline dropped at 7:48 a.m. Where did the money go? The piece was sharp. Named names, raised questions, posted screenshots of donation forms tied to private accounts. It asked why a grieving widow's charity events had no known beneficiaries, and why every date overlapped with court filings. Back in the judge's chamber, the court issued an interim order. Dad moved what was left of the family accounts into a trust for Percy. On paper, he was the legal custodian again, but day to day, that stayed with me. He signed the final form, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I'll backstop. You steer." Like we were prepping for a shoot, like he was handing me the call sheet. We didn't hug, just stood in the same room like we had before the river pulled him under. That night, Sophie came off her shift and walked straight to our porch without knocking. She carried cocoa, still warm. Percy had lined his notebooks across the table, edge to edge, like planks on a dock. We sat in silence for a minute. I kept my hands in my lap. Then I told her the quiet thing. I didn't think I'd ever be allowed to stop surviving. She didn't flinch. She reached across and placed her palm on the table, right between the notebooks. She said, "You did more than survive. You built something." Then she leaned back and just stayed there, like it was her spot now. Calder tried one more motion, Some last-minute emergency objection citing improper placement and parental destabilization. It died in paperwork. No traction. No teeth. The court scheduled a formal custody review for spring, but under the interim order, Percy's residence stayed with me. His brother. Day-to-day care was mine. Legal structure belonged to Dad again, with the understanding that he wasn't ready yet, which we all knew. The attorney wrapped up the paperwork, handed me a copy and said, "This holds unless someone makes a serious mistake." I nodded. That won't be me. Dad offered to take us back to the city house, said it still had our things, said the neighbors asked about us. I looked at Percy. He said, "The attic is calibrated." That settled that. We stayed. That week, I slept without my boots next to the bed. First time since we ran. No sirens. No texts from Ingrid. No fake notices under the door. Just us. Just the roof. The cold. The soft hum of Percy scribbling. Looking back, I should have known the hard part wasn't over. It was just finally honest. The city book fair set up under string lights and late-season leaves. Tables lined the edge of the park like a map of people who refused to quit. Every indie imprint had a fold-out banner and a square reader. Ours didn't. Just a hand-painted cardboard sign that read North Harbor Pages in Marla's messy block letters. Dad stood off to the side, camera slung low, arguing with Henderson in quiet tones. Henderson kept nudging him about relaunching the travel imprint. Said it was time. Said he could add a small fiction line too, something new to build, something he could shape from the other side of the storm. Dad said, "One step at a time," but he didn't say no. Percy sat cross-legged near the fountain, holding Harbor Brothers like a church book. He didn't read loud, but people leaned in anyway. His voice carried without trying. Dorian Pike sat just behind him, working a quiet beat from a loop pedal. Soft harbor sounds, the kind he promised wouldn't get in the way. It didn't. It landed perfect. Len moved boxes like he was running a dock. Didn't wait for instructions. Just refilled the table, checked the cash tin, and flagged Marla whenever we got low on anything. She set up a tip jar labeled Attic Snacks and claimed she didn't care about the numbers, but every time someone dropped in change, she counted with her eyes like it was inventory. I let her. Around noon, another indie editor stopped by, dropped a card and said, "We'd love to do his next run." Dad took the card, looked it over and didn't reach for his pen. "We'll do right by his pace," he said. "Nobody rushes the kid who writes about lighthouses." We signed the paperwork later that afternoon, me listed as custodian under the court's interim order. Every cent of Percy's royalty split routed straight into his trust. I triple-checked that part. Back home, Sophie put me in the manager slot officially. Gave me a clean printout of the new schedule, my name bolded in 4 places. I handled vendor calls, planned stock levels, trained a new part-timer named Gio, who asked too many questions but learned quick. Sophie told me, "You're not just good at this. You're good with people who need the structure." I said, "That's what it takes." She smiled like she already knew. Henderson tracked one of Bram's Shell LLCs to a rented drop address near the river. The paper followed up with another piece. Same reporter, sharper tone. By midsummer, a grand jury letter went out with Bram's name at the top and 2 more buried in the fine print. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pour drinks or post screenshots. I just breathed. Ingrid's invites dried up. Eunice Vale posted a statement about focusing on personal wellness and removed half her garden party photos. No public apology, no backpedaling, just disappearance. Invitations dried up. Once you're not useful, you fall off their calendar. The city house, the one Ingrid tried to flip early, finally got repaired. Dad handled that part. We didn't move back. Instead, we rented it legally, to a middle school teacher with a dog named Button. The rent check went straight to Percy's trust, not to Ingrid's dresses or gala hors d'oeuvres. Between my cafe paycheck, Percy's growing royalties, and the steady backstop Dad kept adding from his own trust contributions, we didn't guess at bills anymore. We paid them. On time. Every time. At one of the late readings, Mrs. Ives brought her son for the first time. He sat beside Asa. Percy finished reading a short piece about two boys in a library, one who liked stories and one who liked numbers. When he finished, Asa introduced him like a stage manager. Their handshake lasted longer than most, and then they let go at the same time, no awkwardness between them. After the event, Dad handed me a memory card. Shot it all with a little mirrorless camera, just enough resolution, nothing flashy. He said, "Cull it. Keep what matters." I did. I kept 2 frames. One of Percy looking up at me like he had when we first ran, and one of Sophie laughing with her eyes half closed and her sleeves rolled up. By the end of the month, the numbers came in. An indie press printed a combined run of 12,000 units, first and second runs combined, off pre-orders, reorders, school library orders, and a network of teachers who had picked up the blog coverage. Percy heard the number, shrugged, and said, "Can we still do open mic on Thursdays?" We said yes. That night, after the last customer left and the back room was dark except for the undershelf light, I turned to Sophie while she counted beans for the morning. I didn't pitch it with a speech or a ring or anything too dramatic. I just said, "Move in." She looked at me like she'd already packed. "Yes," she said, "you've been ready. I was waiting for you to say it." Then she flipped the lights off and said, "Tomorrow you're training Geo, and I'm sleeping on the left side of the bed." We strung warm lights along Grandma's old fence like we were fixing it with brightness instead of nails. Percy insisted on symmetrical spacing, and I let him run the staple gun while Asa held the ladder. The air had that dry winter sting that cuts your nose and clears your head. It felt right. We dragged the folding table out from under the porch and set it by the apple tree. The legs were a little uneven, but Dad folded a napkin to wedge underneath. Then he straightened the tablecloth twice like he always did. Crease at center, edges squared, hands steady. Sophie stood next to me in her coat, hair pinned back, cheeks flushed from the cold, and from telling Len to knock it off with the cider jokes. "This thing looks like an altar if you squint," she said. "It's not for sacrifice," I said. "Just promises." Percy wore a navy sweater and had 3 pencils tucked in his breast pocket. Yellow, black, and blue, his version of comfort armor. Asa walked behind him like a bodyguard, holding a small cloth pouch like it was national security. The rings were inside, tied together with baker's twine. Mrs. Ives cried during setup, not at the big moment. Just when Percy handed her a folded program, he made himself with a lighthouse drawing on the back. Len cracked a joke about not being able to cry because his contacts would freeze. It didn't land, but Marla laughed anyway and queued up a playlist from her phone speaker, the same one that survived 4 birthdays and 1 power outage. Gnome Ridley sent a note on lined paper. Said weather kept him from making the drive, but he was proud of us all. Dad read it twice under his breath and folded it into his wallet. Didn't say much else. He didn't have to. Henderson stood off to the side near the shed, hands in his coat, eyes scanning the whole yard like a man used to measuring exits. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it stayed in place. Like he knew this wasn't just a ceremony. It was the end of the hard part. We didn't hire an officiant, no robes, no podium, no arch, just us and the people who got us here. We said our words plain, the way we say everything. Sophie said, "You're stubborn and steady. You don't flinch when it counts." I said, "You're the one who turned our survival plan into a life." That was it. That was enough. Then Percy stepped up, cleared his throat once. Read a short essay he wrote the night before, printed in 12-point font with the margins adjusted just so. He said, "A brother is a job title you don't retire from. It doesn't expire. It just gets more complicated." Then he handed a copy to Sophie. "Welcome to the team." Asa nodded like a director calling cut. Dad raised the camera and snapped one shot. Checked the histogram like old habit. Then said, "One more," and shot again. I knew the second one would be the keeper. At midnight, we clapped sparkling cider lids together and pretended they were champagne corks. Percy held his cup up too high and almost spilled it on his notebook. Len yelled, "Midnight roll call!" And Marla lit a sparkler from a candle. I looked around at every single person and gave them the only toast I had left in me. If you can carry, carry. If you can wait, wait. If you can love, love loud and steady. That was the truth. We ate chili from a big slow cooker and store pie that was better than it had a right to be. Sophie leaned on my shoulder as the crowd thinned, heaters still humming under the tree, and she asked, "So what do we do next?" I looked at the attic windows glowing above us. Percy had left them cracked for airflow. "Breakfast at 6, I said. "Reading at 7. Same as always." She smiled. "Steady." "Yeah, steady. Before you head out, Happy New Year to you. I hope this year brings you real love, quiet happiness, and people who stay close when things get hard. And let me ask you something real. If someone in your life tried to take control of what matters most to you, would you stay quiet or fight with everything you have to hold your ground? If this story hit home, tap the hype button to help it reach others who need it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's just one click, but it means everything to us. And drop a comment, even just great story or your take on what you do. I'm listening. Love you guys.